All right, C-suite execs are throwing money at AI like it's a magic fix, but will it solve the real problems plaguing your workday? Are we truly looking at an AI revolution or just another IT nightmare? Today, we're continuing to make sense of this disconnect with Lauren Maffeo, an award-winning author, speaker, and editor. Her book, Designing Data Governance from the Ground Up, is out now, and it's been translated into a LinkedIn learning course with fabulous reviews I saw this morning. Previously at Gartner, Lauren analyzed emerging tech's impact on businesses. I cannot wait for this conversation. Hope you're excited too. But first, welcome to this week's episode of Make Sense, a video podcast that simplifies complex issues at the intersection of tech and people. There are many. So whether you're totally hyped on artificial intelligence and you're ready for that robot takeover, okay, you do you. Or you want to crawl into a cave after deleting all of your social media accounts. I might have deleted Instagram off my phone this morning. I'm here with my guests to help make sense of what's going on so you can design yourself into the future. My name is Lindsay T, the Lady Engineer. I'm a pragmatic futurist, human-first technologist, serial entrepreneur, and innovation consultant. If you're new here, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So let's make sense of the AI gold rush with Lauren Maffeo. Lauren, how are you?
Hey, Lindsay, I'm doing great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm good. How was that introduction?
That was great. That was
Yeah.
perfect. I couldn't have done it better.
This is a conversation I am obsessed with, and I can't wait to break it down with you and get your perspective. We start every episode with a first segment called Crystal Ball, What Does the Future Hold? So this is where I call out predictions that others made for this year. Some of them are kind of like trends, and my guests, they tell us their hot take, their 2 cents. So these three are in your wheelhouse. I'm going to fire off these three, and I want you to say, yes, I want that to happen. No, I don't want that to happen. Or yes, it is happening. And maybe a little bit of context, okay?
Yep. Oh, so rapid fire, just yay,
Yeah.
nay, maybe. Yep.
I say rapid fire, but then it always turns into a conversation. So, but put a pin on that. The fear of AI taking everyone's jobs will continue to grow.
I think that's a yay. We're especially seeing that now in white collar industries, particularly in tech. Ironically, the sector that is creating these very robots or whatever you want to call them. And, it's interesting, especially like you said, I was at Gartner for several years, and there was a lot of talk about AI coming not just for those roles that are more repetitive in nature, but also for that more white collar work, as we call it, and we are seeing what I think is the beginning of that, and I think we're in for a rocky 5 to 10 years as we navigate this transition into what roles AI is going to create, because it will create a lot more opportunities for the sector and for roles that we can't even imagine right now. But in the meantime, a lot of people are going to suffer for it, and work is going to become even more unstable than it currently is.
Yeah. So when Make Sense first started in 2023, it came up in one of the first 5 episodes, that artificial intelligence will not replace you, but a person using it will. I think we for sure have seen that, and almost every guest I pitched that to, if not all of them, was like, yes. But we'll talk about whether AI can really replace us. Will it try? Will leaders try? Is the conversation.
They will
All
try.
right.
They will probably fail spectacularly, but they will try.
Yeah. So, number 2, better AI guardrails and encryption for customer data.
Yeah, yay. I mean, that's absolutely essential. I think there is more public recognition of that now, both in the regulatory space as well as by private organizations. We are seeing every type of company, from a startup to a multinational enterprise, craft AI policies and data protection policies on their own. Critically, in the States, they do have to enact those policies on their own because we do currently lack a broad federal oversight of consumer data. We do not have anything at the federal level like European Europeans do with GDPR legislation, which protects data on a consumer level and gives consumers the right to own their personal data and query businesses about how it's used. We do not have that. But what we are seeing is an increase in legislation at the state level in states like not just California, but also Virginia and New York, where there is more regulation of how AI is used, and they are trying to put more guardrails in place. So absolutely, they are essential. I think the big blocker there is going to be the gap that continues to exist between policymakers and techies who are actually building these tools.
Yeah, 100%. The techies building the tools move a lot faster than tech comprehension of our legislators. And what's interesting is one of my previous guests, Al Chen, he said, no, like that this is mostly all talk. It was kind of like maybe, maybe. And I've seen this in industries, for instance, where, okay, the top 10 priorities for a given company for a hospital, like number 6 is privacy. There's some legislation that you have for patient privacy, but they're only going to do the minimum to like meet that regulation. There's no going above or beyond.
I would agree with that. Without having seen that interview, I do agree at a high level with what you just said and what I think he was getting at, which is the fact that it is very often really whitewashing in a way, and it's a move to make it seem like you're compliant, to make it seem like you care about the data, giving lip service to it without actually implementing those standards in your architecture. That's something I talk about a lot in my work, and something I wrote my book based on is this concept that, yes, you need the right technology to succeed with data quality and governance. Yes, you need the right infrastructure to build models for AI. None of it will work if you do not have a point of view on data governance that both protects your data and the customer's data that you have, as well as implementing those standards and automating them throughout your entire data environment, throughout the entire AI product lifecycle. That is what's missing, and that is what we are seeing people cut corners on. And so if that's what he was referencing, I do completely agree with that. There is more lip service, certainly, to those guardrails. Is enough being done? Not in my opinion, and not nearly fast enough.
Yeah. The trend, though, technically correct. Better than nothing.
I will say the bar is on the floor. So in terms of that, it's better. And the acknowledgement, I mean, honestly, getting there is more than half the battle, I would say, because for so long people just have stuck their head in the sand related to data and said, oh, it's not my problem. We don't have to do anything about it. It's really been the Wild West. And I think we with data right now are where cybersecurity was 5 years ago. 5 years ago, nobody wanted to acknowledge that they needed more cyber standards. They didn't want to acknowledge that their biggest risk was an internal breach, and not even on purpose, by accident. People accidentally leak confidential information all the time. And so now, after several very high profile, very expensive hacks and leaks, that now you are seeing this move towards security that is more genuine and authentic. I think humans are just by nature reactive people. We can intellectually know about a threat. That is very different than experiencing that threat. And so I think it's going to take something major in the realm of data breaches for the industry writ large to really see the light.
Yeah, it's hard to come up with that budget when I read yesterday that 30 to 50% of most companies' IT budgets go towards shadow IT, which I connected in my LinkedIn post and in this conversation with Al Chen to using Excel and other tools that aren't the right tool for the job, where data gets lost, data gets stolen.
That is absolutely true. I can, without going into specifics or naming names, I can confirm from my own experience doing this work. Absolutely true.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So final one. If we can wrangle all this data and keep it secure, data comprehension will get priority over data accumulation.
I would love for that to be a yay, but I think it's probably a nay because I do still see this thought in the industry that the more data you own and collect, the more value your organization has, the more you can do with it. Even if that's true hypothetically, you and I both know that data is not only is it not useful if you don't know how to apply the right data to the right business problem, but it actually is an enormous risk for you, especially if you don't have data retention, suppression, destruction policies in
Yeah.
place. If you don't have those standards automated throughout your ML ops life cycle, then it's all for nothing. I would love to see organizations prioritize data literacy in lieu of the volume, because for a few reasons. One is that data governance is a team sport, and I cringed when I just said that because it's such a cliche, but it really is true. You can't implement data governance throughout your organization without the buy-in from not just your sponsors and senior leadership, but also your colleagues, because you need your colleagues across sales, marketing, customer care to contribute to this effort by writing data definitions, confirming
Yeah.
metadata, writing the standards for what success looks like in their data domains, because then you take those standards and implement them into your architecture. So you need their buy-in, and they need the tools to feel empowered to do that work. And
Yeah.
very often they do not. They think somebody else is going to do it, and rightfully so. I mean, that historically has not been a part of a senior marketing or sales leader's role. And so it's totally understandable that they wouldn't see
Yeah.
that coming.
Well, I wanted to point out a few things because you said so many amazing things. One, I have a saying with my professor that I did my research for when I was at Berkeley, like friends don't let friends model alone. So like data governance is a team sport. I feel like if we were to put together a bunch of mantras and affirmations for us data geeks, those two would go on there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and that in and of itself is a huge culture shift. I mean, I was on a panel last year where someone joked that it's kind of like with software development, it's the old joke, don't bother me with requirements, I'm coding. It's
yeah,
that kind of spend in the data space, right?
right.
There's just people just wanna build things and tinker, and of course that's great if it's on your own. But when you're doing it as part of a business and you've just let 30% of your staff go so you can build more models, it's not so great.
So the title of this podcast is Make Sense, and I want to simplify it for people. And I'm going to take them back to when I was 21 years old and started graduate school. I was a young back then. So I was coming out of 4 years of engineering school, and I saw like everything black and white. That's what engineers do. We see things very discrete and divided and objective. And I take this class on information organization and retrieval. I know it sounds very sexy. And we start talking about the need for like data documentation, XML, data formats, blah, 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 blah. And it was a very simple explanation is like, okay, some people, if you have to write, like if you go to a doctor's office or you order something online and it says address line 1, address line 2, but in another place, it might say address 1, address 2. In another place, it might say province instead of state, right? Country instead of nation. The fact that we have so many words to refer to the same things creates data inconsistency, right? Which is why you cannot do the data stuff alone, because we all have to agree on what that one word is to call that thing. And that's what Lauren's saying about putting it into a data dictionary and being like, we call it address line 1. Don't call it anything else except for address line 1, period.
I haven't
Okay?
stopped nodding my head because everything you said is 100% true. And I always liken things like data mesh, which is an architecture pattern and a series of principles related to managing data more as a product than a service, which that is going down another path, which we may or may not talk about
Mhm.
later. But really, I think about it in terms of information architecture,
Yep.
where it's the principle of how you organize information in a way that is searchable, discoverable, consistent, makes sense, and adheres to predefined standards. I mean, we've all been to websites that we immediately clicked away from because the navigation just didn't make sense. That is still where we are in most data environments. And the reason I kept nodding my head while you talked is I use that example all the time. I always say the word date. Not only is a date, meaning a day of the year, for instance, not only is that written differently in the UK versus the US, for instance. In the UK, the day comes before the month, and it's the reverse in the States. But then a date is also a fruit. So
Yeah.
you could be talking about something completely different, or you
Mm,
could go
mhm.
on a date, and that's a third meaning. And
Yeah.
so so again, it sounds like a irrelevant example maybe to some, but it really goes into the weeds of this is what people in the weeds of data are dealing with. And you might think, well, those mean, they can infer what a date is. And try doing that at scale. That's the thing, is
So,
sure.
like, yeah, good. And this goes back to something, and I'll have to link to the podcast with Joe Mearsman. I'm forgetting what the theory is called, um, but basically that AI can know a lot of things, but it can learn what a lawyer knows, or lawyer learns in 3 years of law school. It has a much harder time learning what a lawyer learns in 25 years of actually being in court. So for
Mhm.
AI to understand the difference between, like, date and date probably is a little too simplistic, but that's what you mean, Lauren, when you say, like, at scale, the computers are not, they're not going to compute, right? If we
Exactly.
don't agree on names. I do want to take us back to this whole idea of data comprehension and having actionable insights versus just being like greedy and getting a lot of data. You pointed it out, but I was going to point it out is that the people that are greedy about collecting data are usually the marketing people who want to get as much information about customers as possible, they tout, and I talk about this, it makes sense, like they tout things like hyper personalization is going to be the norm, but they don't actually know technologically that that company is way unable to do something like that. So they push ahead to collect that data. And it's kind of like if you're sitting at home and you're the type of person that collects a lot of projects and never finishes them, it's kind of a liability on your mental health because you walk around and you see all your unfinished projects and you feel bad about yourself. In a company, you've got one arm, the marketing department, collecting all of this data, but like they're never getting finished or used or comprehended. And it becomes a liability because if you get hacked and that data gets stolen, you're in a deep shit, right? So,
Absolutely, especially, this is also very sector dependent. So it's no accident that the organizations and sectors that are most advanced in their data efforts are in finance, mostly, I would say, and then healthcare, and even to a degree, education. And that's actually something that surprised me when I was doing research for my book on data governance. And I was thinking, who's doing this well? Who is setting up a data governance council? Who is defining their data domains? Who is coming up with decision mechanisms about who does what? A lot of the work online is being done at the university level. And that is surprising until you think about the type of data in their possession and how much personally identifiable information, or PII, they have in their purview that they have to protect and keep safe. And so that is not to say that universities are the most tech forward organizations that we have, but it is an illustrative example of how you can prioritize data governance and policies. And I mean, it's a must do if you work in this area of work with a lot of PII and a lot
yeah.
of sensitive information that you own. So it's certainly not impossible, much as certain people would like to think it is, so they don't have to do it.
So I want to go into the second segment to learn a little bit more about you, Lauren. Our second segment is Who Needs a Safety Net? In this segment, I ask my guests to share the risks or failures, nay, learning lessons of creating their own path into the future. So, Lauren, you have taken a very unique journey to grow into this award-winning author and thought leader on data, AI, and innovation. You started your career as a journalist, right?
I did. I started my career as a freelance journalist covering the European tech sector for digital news sites like The Next Web and The Guardian. At the time, this was 2012, 2013. So the European tech sector, especially in London, where I lived then, was small but growing really quickly. And I had wanted to be a journalist since high school. So that was not new. And I did not care what beat I got. I just knew that I had to get clips and I had to get experience, especially because I had just finished graduate school and I needed to put a portfolio together. So I chose to report on tech because that is the industry I fell into through connections. And I learned over time that I actually genuinely enjoyed learning about the sector, that the concept of entrepreneurship and having people speak about their business ideas was really fascinating to me. And so I got to learn a lot about it. I just said on Twitter recently, though, that if I could do one thing different in my early news career, I would not have taken so many entrepreneurs at face value. I worry that when I look back at my old clips and my old articles, that I should have been a little more critical of their business models and maybe not taken everything they said
So
within.
let's put a pin in that because you like actually kind of zipped through all my follow-up questions. Not all of them, but some of them. So I'm gonna go back. So I was gonna ask you what drew you to reporting on innovation technology. It sounds like you kind of fell into it in a way. You had the opportunity to write and it was on that topic. What kept you there? So then what was it that was so interesting that you're like, oh, this is where I started and I'm gonna keep going? Like what was interesting to you about innovation and technology?
I think it was the concept that it's always changing and there's always something new to learn, which is one of the things that I enjoyed about journalism. This concept that there was always a new story to report on, there was always someone new to speak to, another angle I could pursue. And I think tech is very similar that
Yeah.
way.
Cool. So when do you believe, like in your, if you look at your trajectory, at what point did you go from reporting on to working in innovation?
It happened pretty quickly. By the time I was in my mid 20s, I was working in the sector. I got a job as the ninth employee and second marketing hire for a SaaS company that was based in Silicon Valley. The team was fully remote, which 10 years ago was a novelty. This was
Hmm.
way before COVID. And so I worked from home for this product roadmap software company, and mostly producing marketing collateral because that's a very easy transition for a former journalist. And then from there, I went to Gartner first as an editor and then eventually became an analyst. I worked in the small and mid-sized business unit of Gartner. So I eventually started specializing and focusing on business intelligence trends and technologies for SMBs, and AI, ML does fall into that. So that's really where my interest in AI was honed. It was at Gartner when I was covering the sector, and then I went to my current job.
So going back to the you voiced a bit of a regret that maybe you took entrepreneurs at face value about their claims. You didn't challenge them. It's like knowing what you know now, how much could you perceive as a journalist? Like how much I always wonder this because and I mentioned this to you before we recorded how I come from an engineering background. Everything I read, everything I write, every place I've worked, I'm always thinking about the like cogs and spokes underneath everything. And I always wonder for those reporters reporting on technology, how much do they understand of like what the wheels and spokes in the back end and the personalities and BS?
At, at that time, I can honestly say I understood none of it. And so it was very much a learning curve. The thing about being a journalist is that you don't need, at least at first, to be an expert on a subject. You need to find the experts who can explain a subject best and then ask them the right questions to explain it to readers. So I didn't need to be an expert, which it was a positive. But I think naturally, as you grow in your journalism career, you are expected to have more of a point of view, especially in this day and age, that the concept of objectivity, as I was taught in journalism school, really doesn't exist anymore. I would argue that audiences don't want it today. They want a reporter who stands for something and who has a point of view. Now, you can argue about whether that's journalism or not, and some people would say it's not, but that is, like it or not, the modern media landscape that we live in.
Hmm. So, again, knowing what you know now about, I put in the intro, like the rush are rushing to, implement AI strategies. Maybe they're moving too fast. Marketing is collecting more data than it's like even safe to be sitting on, let alone like using. I guess which problems were most apparent to you from the outside in, and which were you like, huh, I never knew, kind of like smack you in the face, maybe?
Well, when I was a analyst at Gartner, was informed through, that's when I first really started learning about the problem of bias in AI. At the time, again, this was 5, 7 years ago. So the concept that AI could be biased was still something that people were very skeptical of at that time,
Mhm.
because the idea was that, because again, people who did not know how AI is produced and how data is used would say, well, it's math, so there is no way for it to be biased. And we know now that that's not the case. Many of us in the sector know about how during the algorithmic training process, byproducts of sensitive attributes can correlate
Mhm.
with non-sensitive attributes and then inadvertently produce a biased result,
Right.
even if it didn't mean to. So that is something I didn't learn, though, until I was an analyst covering that very niche sector, and I happened to be covering it at the right time. That was not something on my radar at all when I was a tech reporter. But in my defense, I don't think I wrote a single article about
Yeah.
AI in 2013 because it was
I'm
not
not
part of
trying
the
to
mainstream.
skewer your 2013 version. I'm just like, like sometimes it's like, did you have an aha moment where you were like, wow, this is, it's like Wizard of Oz when you pull the curtain backwards and you're like, huh, I didn't know. So like I know now you're a service designer. So you're like actually working hands on designing solutions. And I talk a lot about elevating our capacity as innovators because so many of our projects fail. So, what do you see now as like, I guess, what was your introduction, initiation to the dysfunction in the innovation process?
I think it was when I did start designing these systems and designing for organizations that have a lot of data that in some cases exist to disseminate data, and then seeing how there were no data standards, there were no QA practices built in, how getting one product out the door, and by product I mean a report or a dashboard, would take a month, if not months, to complete because there was no automation built in. So it was doing the hands-on work and seeing firsthand how widespread this problem is that really was the aha moment that led me to write the book.
That's awesome. When you look at like your journey, I guess like what if you were talking to anyone that's trying to move from journalism into tech, or yeah, just I guess any lessons learned in the process.
I think the biggest thing I would say is to have confidence that your skills are transferable, and the fact that you were a journalist is going to be a huge asset in your career, because you're not only primed to ask the right questions of the right people, you're also somebody who it has a bias towards holding people accountable. That is something that can be a big challenge in work, because very often it is not about holding people accountable, or at least it should be, but it's not. And it's more about towing the line. But you, as a journalist, have a lot of value and a lot of valuable skills that you bring to the tech sector. You also, I would hope, have a level of critical thinking that is very often not existent as it should be in the more black and white world of building technology. And understanding the user side of technology is a critical component that I don't see often enough in this space.
100%. There's a ton of pressure on tech teams to just like know the answer, left brain, and like very kind of calculated analytical, but also just know the answer. And then we need to slow down, use our right brain, access our empathy and compassion and creativity so that we can understand the really hard, nitty gritty, subjective part of problems, the people part of problems. And that just is not done. Most teams, most people just assume like people will do it this way because this is how I designed the software to do it. And they will follow this rules. That is just not the case.
Yep. And that's why you need to do usability testing, but that's another podcast.
I have like a ton of YouTube videos on usability testing, why we need to do that. Well, cool. I think you're absolutely correct. Asking great questions, also being great with your words and understanding language seems like a great fit for data as well as service and product design. So awesome transition on your part. Final segment, deep dive. In this segment, we get into the details about a specific technology's implications for everyday people. So, for Make Sense listeners, in celebrating the 50th episode of this podcast, on the website lindsayt.com, where you can find all the episodes, I shared that the topic of enterprise software, the tools that most of you use at work, will continue to be a recurring theme because I believe its ineffectiveness both drives macro and system level problems and the micro daily frustrations most employees like yourself have with their jobs. So I'm going to start, Lauren, with a question I ask a lot. Why does enterprise software at work suck?
That is a question that is above my pay grade. I will say, I mean, I think the biggest answer I can give is lack of investment. It is not given the resources in money or people that it very often needs to improve. You also have a habit of poor documentation, if it exists at all. So then what typically happens in legacy organizations is that the one person who knows how to do something retires and nobody else has any insight into how to replicate their job. And then I think on top of that, a lot of care is given to the back end of the technology, while very little thought is given to the interface and the user.
Ding, 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 ding.
That's the biggest one.
Back to what we ended the last segment saying, usability testing, understanding the customer. I'll share my first full-time job. I was collecting requirements for the interface. I asked my client, the manager, can I talk to some of your employees? Because they're going to be the ones using the software. And he said, that's not necessary. They'll use it
never is
for their job.
Yeah. Yep. I've heard that line. You don't have to talk to them. It's not necessary. You can talk to me. I've heard that many times throughout my career, and that is a very delicate dance to do.
It's really frustrating. So let's get a little bigger. Enterprise software we use at work kind of sucks. Will AI help? What is the current state of big company AI initiatives?
I think it already is helping in many ways. The reality is that if you have a desk job, you use AI every day because it's already embedded into the workplace applications that we use in a myriad of ways. One that comes to mind is Canva, which is design software that is meant to be, a step above PowerPoint, and it's meant to be used by really anybody who does not have the design skills to be using the Adobe Suite or Figma. And Canva is a tool that incorporates a lot of AI. We're even seeing it. I mean, I would imagine many of your viewers use the Microsoft Office suite. And when I go into PowerPoint now, there is a lot of automation and AI within the system that I can see. And very often it does improve what I'm trying to do within. So we are seeing those improvements. Although I think it's no accident that those improvements in my last example are from Microsoft, because they're, as everybody knows, investing incredibly heavily in this space. And I think we're only going to see more organizations try to emulate that.
So, are they moving too fast? Are leaders investing in AI too quickly?
They are, if they have not figured out how they are mapping their AI usage to solve very specific business problems. And if they are moving too fast, if they have not prioritized which AI case studies are going to get priority. And very often what I see is a hair on fire scenario where everything is a priority, therefore in reality nothing is a
Nothing.
priority. The priorities change every day. That is most commonly what I see, because because a lot of organizations lack that very clear distinction of what a data product is meant to do and how it is going to not just improve the business but improve the user experience. And that's critical when it comes to AI, especially in this era of hyper personalization. So they are moving too fast if they haven't thought about those things, let alone put together a high level data governance policy for the data used to train AI. And most organizations are in that boat where they have not done that crucial groundwork to really start leveraging data to build AI in a more strategic way.
And are these is it the AI that they are building to serve their customers, or AI that they're adopting to use internally?
I would say mostly my answer was aimed at the former, but it goes to both. I think a lot of marketing teams have caught on to the fact that if they say their product has AI, that is often enough, because most customers won't dig in further. And they're probably correct about that. And I know this because, again, when I was an analyst at Gartner, I would have to do product validation before writing about particular software tools. And I would ask follow-up questions that most vendors couldn't answer.
Are they studying from the same playbook that entrepreneurs are studying from? Like, there's the meme that's like, if I just say AI 5 times, an investor will open their wallet. And it's like,
Possibly. And that is historically, for the right type of investor, or a very narrow type of investor, that has worked.
yeah, right. So you say blockchain 5 times fast. You say AI five. Yeah, the fat investor. You had mentioned earlier, we talked about people losing their jobs to AI and possibly like losing their jobs too soon. Think you have an interesting perspective or thought on companies, getting rid of their whittling down their workforce too soon?
Yeah, I think it's disturbing to me how we have seen so many organizations, Google, Salesforce. We've seen these big tech giants lay people off, not because they had a bad quarter always, or because a product was taken totally out of service and they needed to get rid of the team. We've seen a lot of companies preemptively cut jobs in non-revenue roles in order to reinvest that money in building their own AI. And I think that sets a really scary precedent, because I think we're all resolved to the fact that if a company has a bad quarter, let alone a bad year, there will be layoffs. That's just how it is. But we also saw in recent years how even the threat of a recession could cause companies that overhired to correct course. And now we're seeing another dangerous precedent, which is that even if a company is financially doing well, they are still in a position where they're going to cut human jobs in favor of building out AI in many cases before they have established those very clear business requirements, use cases, etc.
Before they've even, and even further, before they've like established the desired like outcomes or proven that the thing can produce those outcomes that the people could. So the way I like to describe this system of enterprise software adoption is that CTO, CIO brings in some technology. And let's talk about a company that's adopting a tech AI internally to help speed up their operations. In anticipation of like being more efficient, they might lay off like let's just say 5% of their workforce. We have now bought this $4.5 million enterprise tool. We can lay all these people off. But because they don't invest enough in change management, they don't invest enough in usability and user experience and training, when they don't reach the outcomes that they thought they were going to, or they don't see productivity and efficiency in their operations go up, they inevitably have to go hire people again. Mm-hmm. And one of my previous guests pointed out that humans have a way of working their way back into every solution. So you adopt a technology solution, now there's a new job that's pulling reports from that technology solution every single week or something. I've seen this cycle over and over again for 20 years that there's like this excitement, oh, we can fire people and use robots. And then the technology comes in, doesn't meet expectations, and then more people are hired again.
Yep, so, I think that's where we are headed in a couple of years once most, more companies at least get wise to that.
Yeah, it just sucks that this cycle keeps repeating. And I think one of the things that you mentioned is that we have a really hard time learning from other people's failures and mistakes. We have to experience them ourselves.
I agree.
So do you have any, if let's say a lot of Make Sense guests are non-technical, some are founders with tech startups, others are consultants who just know that every company is a technology company these days. What advice would you give to them as they're developing their own opinion on enterprise AI strategies?
My biggest piece of advice would be to not just be incredibly clear about the value your business brings, but to take that to the next step and really define how your use of data fulfills that reason why you exist. And the reason I emphasize that is because most entrepreneurs can say very quickly and clearly what their company does. Maybe that's overstating, but you at least should. It's understood that is expected. But what is much less clear is how your current data practices help fulfill that business mission and your reason for existing. And if you can't tell me, if you're the chief technology officer or chief data officer and you don't know which server X data set lives on and you don't even have an idea, you probably can't go deeper and give me the right data definition for the right term, or tell me if you have data lineage tracking set up, tell me what your data destruction policy is. If you can't answer that very basic question of how your data usage enhances your organizational reason for being, I don't think you're going to get very far.
Strong. Question before we wrap up. I said your LinkedIn learning course has like 82 reviews, lots and lots of stars. How long is it? Is it short?
It's
that people want
39
to?
minutes, so
Oh,
it is meant to
okay.
be quick. And the book that I wrote, Designing Data Governance from the Ground Up, is 100 pages. Oh, it's about 100 pages and 6 chapters. So it is meant to be a quick read to get the details on what you need to do in order to start your very first data governance program to prime your organization for AI usage. So the course is 39 minutes long, and there is a accompanying book, as mentioned, that is about 100 pages in ebook format and about 85-90 in print.
I'm going to tell you that my sister is in the middle of a massive digital transformation and she has been loving these top topics. So I think you have at least one new one new student from
Awesome.
her directly. I'm
Good to
probably
know.
going to take it too. I want to learn so much from you. I want to learn more. So let's just make it make sense. I'm just going to say stop. Let's kind of stop perpetuating the hype around AI and encourage yourself, your clients, and team members to focus on the problems that need to be solved without being attached to what the solution is. Incremental improvements are going to be better for the long term than shoving some new technology down everyone's throat without really understanding what it does or how it's going to help. So, thank you for listening to Make Sense with me, your host, Lindsay T, and guest Lauren Maffeo. We hope you enjoyed our take on enterprise AI and data governance. Lauren, where can people find you online? Do you want them to find you online?
People can connect with me on LinkedIn under my name. I am also on Twitter, although less so these days. I would say that LinkedIn is the best place to connect with and reach me because I'm on there daily, and then we can figure out where to take it from there.
Yeah. So, as always, you can check out all the links and resources in the show notes. I actually already started working on them. So, I'll have a link to her LinkedIn Learning course as well as to her book on Barnes and Noble. Final note, if you want to continue to be the smartest person in the room, make sure you're getting notified when each episode hits on YouTube. Hit subscribe for audio only. Follow wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you, Lauren, for joining me.
Thank you for having me.